The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Once again, it was F5 o'clock yesterday afternoon. The Trump administration continues to basically be in disarray. I don't know exactly what other language I should use. It relates to staffing. It relates to Russia. It relates to resignations and firings. And this time, it's the latest communications director in a long string of communications directors, Hope Hicks, who is 29 years old. She's been with Donald Trump since pretty early on in his presidential campaign in 2016. She has worked for Ivanka Trump. She is, shockingly, one of the longest-serving Trump staffers, and she's resigning. Now, why does she say she's resigning? Because she feels she's accomplished everything she could in the job. There's never a perfect time to leave, but for her, the time to leave is soon. It already makes no sense because I can't think of anything that Hope Hicks accomplished as a Trump staffer. It's just hard to buy that explanation.
She wants to pursue other opportunities, but when you're 29 years old and the communications director,
yeah, that's a good opportunity. Yeah. That's a great opportunity. She's in the good opportunity. There's always more to everything, though, right? The list of interesting timing is very, very long. First of all, she announced her resignation the day after she was questioned for 8 hours by the House Intelligence Committee looking into Trump-Russia collusion, during which she admitted, yes, she would occasionally lie as part of her work for Donald Trump, but she never lied about anything related to Russia. Of course not. I believe her. Of course, everyone that's being asked about the timing, she testifies for 8 hours. She doesn't answer a lot of stuff, as we heard from Democrats who were in the room. And then now we learn of her resignation. Very coincidental timing. Staffers at the White House are saying it has nothing whatsoever to do with the Russia testimony. But does anybody really believe that? We're told she was planning this resignation for a while and that this is just a coincidence as to when it's happening. Maybe it's possible that she fears indictment, right? That's sort of like the top level, easy question to ask. Is she worried about getting indicted? And thus, is she trying to sort of create some distance between herself and the Trump administration? Or is she positioning herself to maybe flip at some point? Is it possible that the 8 hours of testimony made it so that she realized she just cannot tolerate defending the administration any longer? No, I don't think it's that last one. And I honestly don't know what it is. But it's very difficult to believe the timing coincidence and that the resignation has zero whatsoever to do with the fact that she was grilled for 8 hours by the House Intelligence Committee about her role and knowledge of the Trump-Russia possible crimes that are being investigated. Now, the other question is sort of not more cynical necessarily, but the question is, does she already have an agreement with Robert Mueller of some kind, which included going and testifying before the House Intelligence Committee, not answering more than what she absolutely can't get away declining to answer, and then saying that she's going to leave the administration. Again, we don't know. There's also the case in terms of possible criminality by Hope Hicks. There's not there's a relatively strong case that you could eventually see an obstruction charge against Hope Hicks. After all, she was involved in that statement that Donald Trump Jr. gave, the first statement, which was all lies about the infamous Trump Tower meeting. Does she have a role there that could lead to an indictment? We don't know. But the smartest thing for her to do, if she does think she's exposed to an indictment, and how would she not be at this point, would be talk to Mueller before testifying at the House Intelligence Committee and then create some kind of a path forward. I don't know. I don't know what the explanation is.
It's a little hard to speculate because Hope Hicks wasn't really in the public spotlight, which is surprising for a communications director, but we didn't see her give speeches. I don't think that testimony was in a public setting. I think it was behind closed doors.
Yes, it was. And she also, I mean, now we're getting sort of further away, And it's almost tabloid-like, as Pat was saying before the show, but it's relevant to what's going on, which is what is going on in terms of the Rob Porter connections. We told you that Rob Porter resigned a few weeks ago after news broke that he was accused of beating multiple ex-wives and he wasn't going to be able to get a security clearance. Hope Hicks had been dating Rob Porter, and I mentioned it at the time that Hicks staying in the Trump administration could kind of get weird. Well, not only is she leaving, but a week ago she also separated from Rob Porter. Again, I don't know what's going on. What we do know is that according to everybody in the room for her testimony Monday, there was nothing she said that even hinted at the idea that she might be separating from the Trump administration. And the question sort of at the 30,000-foot level is what's the impact, right? I mean, first of all, it's nuts that a 29-year-old former child model with no experience at all in politics was, up until now, one of the longest-serving Trump staffers, right? That is an indication of how backwards things are. But more broadly, we're going to put up on the screen a partial list of some of the Trump administration officials that have either been fired or resigned. And again, this is only a partial list, plus all the people that resigned from various committees, including people like Elon Musk and advisors. When Trump said he would hire only the best people, are those the ones that are still there? Or are those the ones that are leaving? Like, is this the list of good people and they're too good for Trump? Or are these the bad ones that he said he wouldn't be hiring, but the people that remain are the good ones?
It's really hard to say. I think you should read through that list to the tune of Sarah McLachlan's In the Arms of an Angel.
Right. Yes, we should have
funny.
some kind of like
a montage.
An emotional montage of all the good people, great people, according to Trump, that we've lost. So Hope Hicks, another one bites the dust. Will we ever really find out what caused the timing of this resignation? Maybe. We actually might. I mean, there are multiple investigations going on that are interested in what Hope Hicks knows and when she learned it. So maybe we will someday find out. We never really know at any specific point in time what special prosecutor Robert Mueller is looking into as part of his Trump-Russia investigation. But every once in a while we hear like, oh, someone was asked about this topic, or Mueller has subpoenaed documents about that topic. And we're sort of speculating a lot of the time. But we've now learned that Robert Mueller's team is starting to ask some really specific questions about whether Donald Trump knew that Democratic emails had been stolen before it was known publicly. And that's the key. At the time and since, we've covered ad nauseum, and I won't rehash all the details of how the timing of Trump's comments about Hillary's emails and the DNC emails, the timing was suspicious given the conversations that we later found out were taking place at the time. For example, between Trump's team and Russians, and then Trump's public statements about emails, or between Don Jr. and Julian Assange of WikiLeaks, and then Donald Trump's public statements about emails. But the underlying question of all of it is, did Trump know about it before it was public, that the DNC had been hacked? And if Trump did know before it was public, it obviously raises a whole new set of questions, and it opens up new branches for Robert Mueller's investigation. Beyond just asking whether Trump knew about the hacked emails before it was public, Robert Mueller's team has been asking about whether Donald Trump was involved in the release of the hacked emails, which again takes us up another notch. Robert Mueller is looking into the relationship between Roger Stone and WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. This is something that came up when I interviewed Roger Stone some months ago. I don't know what's ultimately going to come of this, but what's very clear is that the investigation, number one, is nowhere close to ending. Trump's been saying it was going to be over in 2017 by Thanksgiving, by Christmas, by the end of the year. It seems to me that it's actually building. And number two, it's closing in on specific actions potentially taken by Donald Trump himself. Trump the man, right? Not Trump's campaign, not Trump organization, the business entity, but Trump specifically. It's gotten to what did Trump know and when did he know it? And those are questions that hit pretty close to home in terms of Trump's personal exposure to this. And it would not be at all surprising if these are questions that investigators already know the answers to. It's a super common technique in these types of investigations. And this is part of why there's often a very specific sequence in terms of the order as to who is brought in for questioning. When Robert Mueller's team asks questions about what did you know here or there, or how involved were you in A or B, they know the answers and they want to see whether the witness is going to lie about it, which helps them figure out, are we on the right track? If people are lying to us about things we've already ascertained, it's very likely that there is more here and more to hide. And we know Mueller hires. It's kind of funny. Trump said he would hire the best people, and he really hasn't. It does appear as though Robert Mueller is hiring really good people, really skilled investigators in money laundering, financial crimes, and in other ways. I would be not at all surprised about this, right? Trump talked about WikiLeaks a lot during the campaign. He asked Russia to hack Hillary's emails, later called it a joke when people said, hey, you know, that's insane what you're saying. None of this is surprising. It's just we're getting there now.
It seems like such a key piece of information to investigate. I remember when he was on that campaign stage, inviting Russians to hack the 30,000 missing emails made by Hillary Clinton. It just seemed odd at the time.
It seems strange,
But now, given the investigation, that looks like a key piece of evidence to look into.
It's part of a much broader sort of trend that we've seen. And at this point, the only question I have is, if you're listening to me, if you're watching me right now, do you deny that Trump is a specific target of this investigation? If you do, please get in touch with me and explain to me, how can you at this point say Trump is not personally a target or a person of interest or a suspect, whatever term you want to use in this investigation? Timing-wise, maybe this is related to Rick Gates, right? Rick Gates is the indicted business partner of Trump's former campaign manager and campaign chairman, Paul Manafort. And Gates recently struck a deal to reduce his exposure to punishment, which is exposing Paul Manafort to even more punishment and more indictments potentially. Could this also relate to Donald Trump's bizarre two-word tweet a couple days ago, where he merely tweeted in all caps at 7-something in the morning, witch hunt? Maybe. I don't know. My only surprise is how quickly this has moved beyond Jared Kushner, right? The Jared Kushner level, I thought we were going to be there for a while. And it's clear at this point that we've moved on to the highest level, which is the level of Donald Trump.
You know, that's Trump's strategy now, to downplay the Russia investigation, to call it a witch hunt, as if that's going to answer all the questions that we have.
Yeah, again, it's only raising more questions. If Trump wanted, I mean, it's too late now, right? The ship has sailed. You can't unring a bell. The genie's out of the bottle. Apply whatever analogy you like or want to this. But what Trump should have done from the beginning is say, I've got a legislative agenda that I will be pursuing. I will allow the investigation to continue. I will cooperate in any way that I am asked, and I will continue governing until such time as I'm vindicated, however long that takes. Robert Mueller knows what he's doing, period. No, instead he's gone the opposite direction, and it ends up with all caps tweets like witch hunt early in the morning, which are painting a very, very different picture. Send me your thoughts about these latest revelations. I'm on Twitter at @DPakman, and the show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is LaRue Brown. LaRue, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. And also thanks to our sustaining member of the day, Gary Wilson, who's been with us since March 31st of 2011, coming up on his 7-year anniversary as a member. LaRue, Gary, thank you both. Sign up, join them at davidpakman.com/membership. Make a pledge on Patreon at patreon.com/davidpakmanshow. Whatever works for you. This is audience-supported media, and we do depend on your support to fund the program. We have a David Pakman Show subreddit at davidpakman.com/reddit. Some really good discussions happening there. We're approaching about 6,000 of our viewers and listeners who are subscribed to our subreddit. Let's go through some of the interesting comments and posts on our subreddit that I spotted this morning, including a very interesting article pointing out that now, as a result of Jared Kushner losing his top secret security clearance, that the chief calligrapher of the White House now has a higher clearance than Jared Kushner, which is interesting. Yeah, listen, this is very funny, But the truth is that Jared Kushner's presence in the administration has been concerning and out of place for a very long time. And I feel like being demoted below the calligrapher in terms of your security clearance is just sort of adding insult to injury.
I think it's more insightful that the White House has a chief
calligrapher. Yeah.
I guess they have multiple then.
Well, do you think that that's for those like executive orders that Trump signs, like they're written in nice calligraphy?
Huh.
I assume that those were printed just in like a calligraphy font from a computer, but maybe they actually have someone writing those.
He ruins it with his cardiogram signature.
His very strange signature, yeah. Okay, also from the David Pakman Show subreddit, officials from several states are offering Delta Airlines a new home amid the NRA blowback. We mentioned this yesterday, and I think it was you, Pat, who mentioned something like, listen, there's a risk to going after Delta if you're the state of Georgia, as they've done, because Delta can always move to another state. And I mentioned, well, they could, but it's, Delta has been committed to Atlanta as its primary hub, as its world hub for a very long time. It would be difficult, and it would. But there is no shortage of states that have come out of the woodwork who are saying, hey, we'd love to have Delta in our state, even with their elimination of a discount for NRA members.
I think everyone's just flexing their muscles here. The Republicans aren't going to take away their tax credits. And
you don't think so?
Delta's not going to move. Probably not.
We'll see. We will see. A discussion you can participate in if you have an opinion about it. Also from the David Pakman Show subreddit, Defense Secretary James Mattis has recommended keeping transgender troops in the military, according to a new report on military.com. Yeah, I'm not surprised, and I'm no like big cheerleader of Jim Mattis, but you could sort of tell from the beginning of Trump's attempt to eliminate all transgender service members from the branches of the American military, you kind of got the feeling that Mattis wasn't on board. First, the Department of Defense said something like, listen, Mattis is like on vacation. He wasn't informed of this. Then Mattis sort of wants to wait and see and get a report. And now Mattis says, I actually think we should keep transgender troops. This is not a surprise.
Even though Trump said that he consulted with his generals before making that decision.
Apparently Mattis wasn't
one of them.
Yeah, Mattis was out of town that day, literally speaking. He was actually not in town the day Trump tweeted that transgender service members were going to be kicked out. This is how politics is being done these days, folks. I'm not joking around. And lastly, from the David Pakman Show subreddit, what do you all do to detox from American politics? Sometimes it gets so depressing and so many piles of manure are around. I just need to take a break from it. What do you all do? The Redditor is asking. Yeah, what I do is I try to not pay attention to politics over the weekend. Like Sunday evening, I'll sit down and start looking at what happened and putting together my thoughts for what I want to cover on Monday. But basically, from the time we're done with the Friday show until Sunday evening, I barely pay attention to politics. And it's very common that I'll like get together with a friend for brunch on Sunday morning, and they'll mention something, and I'll have absolutely no idea because it happened Friday night or Saturday during the day. I think that the planned breaks are sort of good because it does get very toxic, especially in the era of Trump.
Yeah, you got to detox in some way.
Yeah.
Be it yoga
Sure.
or a hot tub, something like that.
Yes, absolutely. Well, listen, more about that on the bonus show. Pat will tell us all about how he's what's going on in hot tubs with him. All right, join us on our subreddit, davidpakman.com/Reddit. Respectful political discussion. We have moderators making sure that people don't get out of hand. Join. I'm on there. Pat is on there. Very, very exciting stuff. Yesterday, I told you that in the wake of the Parkland, Florida school shooting, Dick's Sporting Goods was going to raise its gun buying age to 21. They were or are going to remove assault-style rifles from its stores, and they're also getting rid of high-capacity magazines. It's a great change, although, like I said yesterday, they're not doing it at their sister store, Field & Stream, which I actually think is more sort of like the gun enthusiast store. But okay, it's a change, and they're making it, and I think it's the right change. Walmart now is also going to be making changes to its gun sales policy. They are going to stop selling guns and ammunition to people under age 21. They already, you might recall that back in 2015, Walmart stopped selling certain rifles, including the AR-15 in its stores. And it's also going to be removing kids' toys that resemble assault-style rifles from its website. Okay, that one seems more like a PR one than anyone that's going to be sort of practically applicable. But okay, Walmart put out a statement about this. They said it is because of the recent events, meaning the Parkland, Florida shooting. I actually think that there's something else at play here. It's because of the outcry as a result of the recent events. There have been school shootings before, and stores like Dick's and Walmart don't always change their policy. This is not because of the event. This is because of the activism that has been triggered by the event in Parkland, Florida, including by kids. And we may not get comprehensive background checks. Florida might well decide that they're going to arm teachers. But I would argue that already the activism that we've seen after this shooting has catalyzed more change on guns than we've seen in a long time. A lot of it from the private sector, right? Companies making changes to policy. And yeah, like I said yesterday, a lot of these changes are for PR. They are calculated business decisions more than moral decisions. That doesn't mean that they're the wrong decisions. And as a result, I still support it. Now, that's the good of it, right? It's not all waterfalls and sunshine and ginger snaps. The truth is that in many places, Walmart really doesn't sell that many guns. Yeah. Online, there were Walmart employees noting that in 2018, in their particular store that they work in, only like a handful of firearms have been sold. It's still a good thing that Walmart is doing this, but the truth is that a lot of these places, Dick's and Walmart, are not like the go-tos for firearms, and that Walmart and Dick's doing this isn't going to reduce the demand for these firearms. And if anything, could be the opposite. We know that when people become worried that they're not going to be able to get a certain type of gun, they go out and buy it. And actually these headlines, even though I believe that it's the right policy at the micro level, at the macro level, it could create a run on these guns from your local gun stores. We know that under President Obama, the constant fear-mongering from the right about Obama coming to take your guns actually led to record gun sales. And of course, Obama never took anybody's guns. And of course, not to be repetitive, even though these assault-style rifles are commonly used in the mass shootings that we see, most gun deaths are single or double homicides that get very little media attention, and they're committed with handguns, which no one is talking about paring down the sales of at all.
I'd have to imagine that most gun sales happen at these small, locally owned places.
That's
I
my
can't
sense.
think of any big chain like an Ammos R Us out there.
No.
And so those small, locally owned places don't really have to deal with PR as much as these retail giants.
No doubt.
So is there really an incentive for them to raise the age from 18 to 21?
No.
Probably not. So I don't think this is going to make a big difference in the net.
No, and it's particularly not going to make a big difference. Look, and I want to be careful how I say this. Every mass shooting is a major tragedy, right? When 12 people die in a mass shooting, that is 12 times the death that we see in a single homicide. However, just to give you a sense of the numbers, since the Parkland, Florida shooting, which was 15 days ago, right? February 14th was the Parkland, Florida shooting, which killed 17 people and injured, I believe it was 15. In the time that has elapsed since the Parkland, Florida shooting, 495 people have been killed by guns, and another 85 have been injured, right? Since 17 died in Parkland, Florida at the hands of an assault rifle, 495 people were killed, mostly by handguns. Most of the incidents were 1 or 2 people who died. A handful of incidents had 3 or 4 people that were shot dead. So the decision by Dick's and Walmart is a good decision. I support the decision. But I do believe that this is not going to decrease gun sales in the net. I think it's probably going to increase them, and I don't believe that it deals with the broader problems, which are far-reaching, as I've talked about many times, cultural background checks, mental health availability, et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, on the age 21 thing, for the most part, the shootings aren't being done by people under age 21 anyway, right? Sure. I agree that you shouldn't be able to buy a gun if you're under 21, but mostly it's people older than 21 that are committing these horrible acts. I am not criticizing the decisions. I am not saying that they are bad decisions. What I'm saying is this is very, very complex and multifaceted, and this is the tiniest part of the problems at hand.
When we talk about making a change on the government level,
yeah,
I don't think there would be anything unconstitutional about changing the age from 18 to 21.
No.
I mean, if you remember, for the longest time, the voting age was 21 until like the 1970s.
Yep.
So I think they could get away with that without any Second Amendment issues.
Well, they could get away with it without any actual Second Amendment issues. But of course, you would see the Second Amendment fetishists absolutely lose their you-know-what if this was attempted. So anyway, those are my thoughts there, and we'll see if other big companies come out and make similar changes. As if we needed more evidence that arming teachers is a bad idea, a teacher this week was arrested in Georgia after barricading himself in a classroom and firing a gun in school. Now, common sense tells us, gun safety research tells us, educational knowledge tells us that arming teachers is a really bad idea. But we also now have anecdotal evidence. And yes, anecdotal evidence is one of the weakest forms of evidence, but it happens to be corroborative evidence in this case, in addition to everything else that we already know about this. A 53-year-old male teacher in a Georgia high school barricaded himself in a classroom, fired a handgun, held a 30 to 45-minute standoff with police. And yeah, eventually he was arrested. He didn't seem to want to hurt students. He fired the gun at an external window, an exterior window as it's described, when the school's principal tried to get into the classroom that he had barricaded. And of course, when I read this, my reaction was, the students need to be armed. Immediately arm all students so that they can defend themselves against teachers like this. Or maybe we need more teachers with guns. Like if the principal had been armed, instead of failing to get into the barricaded classroom, he would have, I don't know, shot the lock off the door and pushed his way in or something like that. Now, truthfully, fortunately, this was a minor incident, right? The only injury in this entire thing, I guess a student was running away from the classroom that this guy barricaded himself in and like sprained their ankle. So okay, we can be glad about that. But we went through the scenarios last week about arming teachers. You arm teachers, and now you can have teachers accidentally shooting students. You can have a teacher losing it and going after students or other teachers because they're disgruntled or for whatever other reason. You'll have lawsuits against schools for students that were wrongfully shot by teachers. You'll have police showing up in the midst of a chaotic situation. They'll see a teacher with a gun and they don't know, is the teacher with the gun the good human with a gun or the bad human with a gun and shooting the teachers? It has disaster written all over it.
Yeah, I think it's conceivable that a teacher could stop a mass shooter at a school. Maybe that could happen, but I think that the concerns that you just raised far outweigh that possibility.
Well, and the red pill right, as I'm calling them on the internet, they're saying the teacher shooting a gun is a false flag conspiracy meant to discredit Trump's idea of arming teachers. And once again, doesn't anybody think that if you were going to orchestrate a false flag to make arming teachers appear to be a bad idea, wouldn't they at least shoot another student, if not kill another student? Why would you if you're going to set up a false flag school shooting by a teacher to try to discredit Trump's idea of arming teachers, you're not going to go through all that trouble and then have the guy just fire an external window and give himself up to police.
I just think that in a country of, 320 million people, this sort of thing happens from time to time.
Oh, yeah.
But we're only focusing on it now because it's so newsworthy after the recent mass shooting.
And back to the story about we should cover these conspiracy theories, the audience was kind of mixed, and the common opinion was cover it, but don't go through like a long debunking. So that's what I did today. I'm telling you, the red pill right says this was a false flag to discredit Trump. It's patently absurd and makes no sense whatsoever. Join us in our discussion of all of the topics on today's show at davidpakman.com/Reddit. We will take a break and be back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Rachel Leven, who's an investigative reporter for the nonpartisan, nonprofit newsroom, the Center for Public Integrity. And today we're going to talk about pollution. Pollution is an issue, Rachel, that, I mean, it ties into so much of what we're talking about, what we've been talking about for a long time, and particularly under the new EPA. It relates to climate change. It relates to business regulation. It relates to so many important topics. But we actually need to sort of think about, can we even know the degree to which industry and automobiles are polluting the United States? In principle, how would we look up that information? What sources do we have to figure out how much pollution we're putting out?
Sure. So the EPA has a lot of data on its website. things like the toxics release inventory, which is supposed to show toxic pollution from major polluters, industrial polluters. And there's also inventories like the greenhouse gas inventory, which would show emissions, planet warming emissions from major polluters as well.
And as a general sort of overview of that, what really is being measured by that data and what is sort of not part of that data, or what can we not ascertain from those numbers?
I think the question that you're asking is, what do those numbers contain? And so some of them, basically they contain estimates of pollution that's coming out of those facilities, but some of those facilities report direct numbers that are measured, and others basically use formulas and modeling to estimate what their emissions are, but they don't actually test those emissions and put that number out for public consumption.
Is that the primary source of sort of where the reality might differ from the numbers that we get, or is there more to why the numbers that ultimately go public may not be accurate or trustworthy?
Well, so the crux of the AIR program at the EPA is this program focused on emission factors. And there are these tools that basically the EPA has used since before it was called the EPA to guess at how much pollution is coming out of some kinds of facilities. And so those emission factors are used in the modeling done by these facilities. And that goes to showing the final overall number for pollution. But the emission factors were intended to show basically averages. They were intended to be used in a different way than they're being used now. A lot of times, individual facilities are using this information to guess their own emissions rather than the EPA saying in a given state, there are this many facilities and we expect that on average, this is what their pollution would be.
So if you're listening to this, if someone in the audience hears you talking about this, they say, okay, so data that's been released may not accurately reflect how much pollution is being pumped into our atmosphere. But how does that directly affect me? Can you talk about that a little bit and the basis on which permits for individual factories in someone's town or nearby might have been approved or denied based on this type of data?
Yeah, so there are a lot of ways that these kind of estimates can affect individuals. So for one thing, your state regulators are probably using the same emission factors as these that were developed on the federal level. And a lot of those actually come from industry or are based on industry information. So the EPA, and a lot of times, is relying on someone else's information to come up with these estimates. And then these estimates are then used by your state regulators to decide how to regulate the pollution and to control pollution coming out of industrial facilities that are in your community. And occasionally, or often, these emission factors are actually used by individual facilities to show how much pollution they expect would come out of their facility. And it is used by the state and that facility to decide what their pollution limits should be. But sometimes that doesn't actually match up with what their pollution is. And so there's more pollution in that community than a permit would be allowing for or than anyone would have expected.
Is there any way to estimate at sort of like the aggregate or national level to what degree we're probably underestimating the amount of pollution that is being pumped into our atmosphere?
There isn't. And it's a really complex area, right? Like, this is a difficult thing that the EPA has tried to get its hands around, and there's a lot of complexities to it. But for some pollution, for some pollutants, there's pretty clear-cut ways to know that if you put this much of this kind of fossil fuel, for example, into this kind of facility, we can pretty much guess what's going to come out, and it should be relatively accurate. Mm-hmm. So for some pollution, we know that they're relatively accurate. For other types of pollution, like methane, for example, studies have been continuing to come out that basically show these numbers are vastly off. And a lot of the studies that have come out that have been funded by the Environmental Defense Fund, but have been done in coordination with a lot of industry and companies, show that generally means that there's a vast underestimation of methane. So for some, these pollution estimates are actually kind of on target. For others, it's widely off and underestimated. And that just means that we don't have all the information that we necessarily need to be making the best decisions about how to protect people's health, but also how to prevent more global warming than what we would like.
We talk about regulatory capture pretty often on the program, the idea that sort of people from industry end up getting into positions as regulators of the industry that they are supposed to be regulating, and the industry sort of exerts disproportionate amount of control over the regulation. Do you have reason to believe that that's part of why there is so much sort of taking industry's word for how much they're polluting? Is it more a lack of resources on the behalf of the EPA? Is it a combination of the two?
Emission factors are really interesting because they're really hidden in every single regulatory decision that we see, or not every single one, but many of them. So a lot of times it's really a lack of resources. When the EPA has been developing these emission factors over time, it just takes a vast amount of resources. It could take like a year of studies. And if the EPA had their way, they would be doing all of these studies and all of this work on their own. But just because of how time intensive it is and how resource intensive it is, often they have to rely on data that other people can give them. And they do try to measure for, what quality that data is. But, if someone else is doing the testing, there may be ways that they would have liked to have done it differently, and you just have less control over the information coming in. The other aspect of that is that once these emission factors are put in place, the EPA doesn't have a ton of resources to go back and look and check on them. So some of these may have been in place since the 1980s, and obviously best available information now is much different than best available information about air pollution in the 1980s.
Now, at the level of like the individual activist, let's say you're an individual, you learn that there's going to be a factory coming to where you live, there's going to be a community hearing about it, you show up, you express concern about pollution, the industry representative says, nope, here we go, here's the amount of pollution that this is going to put out, and here's how it's going to be mitigated. If you're an individual activist and you've heard this interview and you suspect that that information might not be accurate, what can you really do?
It's hard. I mean, these are really complex data sets, but what I would say is that if you have concerns about it, go to your regulators, ask them to explain to you why that information is correct. Express those concerns through regulatory comment periods. I think that advocates have said that they would like to see much more activity and scrutiny by regulators, but a lot of regulatory action is actually driven by the squeaky wheel. Who's the squeaky wheel? Who's actually calling for this attention to be made to a certain issue? So if you have concerns, you can always reach out to your regulators. And some people have had success reaching out to companies as well. Like, I would think that a lot of companies are trying in good faith to use these factors, and they may be using them as the only information that's there to estimate what their emissions would be. So if you have concerns, you should see them as a resource as well.
All right, very important topic and a complex one. We've been speaking with Rachel Leven, who's an investigative reporter for the Center for Public Integrity. Thanks for talking to us about this, Rachel.
Great, thanks for having me.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I'm completely and totally shocked to tell you, who could have seen this coming? That conspiracy theorist Alex Jones, the host of InfoWars, is being accused of both sexual harassment and blatant anti-Semitism by former employees. Actually, I'm not really surprised at all. 2 former employees of InfoWars have filed complaints with the EEO against Alex Jones. There's a female employee, Ashley Beckford, who says Jones was regularly sexually harassing her. She says she was also the recipient of racial slurs. She's black, not only by Alex Jones, but also by upper management and colleagues. The allegations include that Alex Jones groped her butt. Her complaint states that she was subjected to different terms and conditions of employment in comparison to her non-black African-American peers when it came to her salary, wages, and benefits, and that in regards to her dress and her hairstyle, she was also subjected to different standards. She says she was mocked for her skin tone and called coon by a senior manager. She says Alex Jones was grooming her for future sexual exploitation. And from her complaint, she also said, this is just weird, that Alex Jones often was shirtless in the studio and endlessly leering with or without a shirt at female guests and employees while creating a disgusting and hostile environment. That's one allegation. Another is from a Jewish man named Rob Jacobson, who says he was bullied and humiliated by Jones regularly on the basis of being Jewish. This includes referring to Jacobson in the office as the Jewish individual, the resident Jew, and Jacobson. The Jacobson worked for Alex Jones.
This B-roll is very
the video we're showing of Alex Jones is crazy. Jacobson worked for Alex Jones for 13 years and was fired last May. What do you think caused it? Was it fluoride in the water or something? Or maybe it's that super male vitality stuff that Alex Jones sells that worked a little bit too well. The great thing for Jones, and I'm serious here, the great thing for Jones is that his audience is so filled with conspiracy theorists already that they're going to write this entire thing off as a conspiracy at face value, right? I mean, everything else is, why not this? And it's sad because Alex Jones seems so normal otherwise, as you could see from the video we were showing our audience here. Nobody could have predicted that maybe this is what he was doing behind the scenes.
Well, do we have to take the credibility of the accusers into account here? I know I tend to believe the women and you tend to believe the women too.
Yep.
But these are InfoWars employees, and they're used to making things up. So who knows here?
There's a case to be made that if you had the poor sense to work for InfoWars for 13 years, that maybe we should take everything you say with a grain of sand. What will we? I mean, listen, these are allegations right now from fired employees. You never know whether there's sort of like a disgruntled former employee takedown attempt going on. We will see what ultimately surfaces, but there's nothing at all that I hear and I say, wow, I just can't imagine that Alex Jones would do that. I'm just not seeing anything like that here. This might not really sound like a big story, especially for our show, because it's not a show that often covers sports, but it is kind of a big story politically. The NFL has replaced Papa John's Pizza with Pizza Hut as its official pizza sponsor. Why do we care about that? I care about it more because of how vile and disgusting Papa John's is as a business than how vile and disgusting their pizza is, okay? I don't have anything positive to say, honestly, about Papa John's Pizza or Pizza Hut Pizza, but I have lots of negative things to say about Papa John himself, a.k.a. John Schnatter, who's the epitome of the uninformed right-winger. Going back to Obamacare, going back to years earlier, this guy from Papa John's has been misguided and just flat out ignorant in terms of his political comments. And you might remember that back during the early Obamacare days, Papa John Schnatter, I don't even know how to pronounce it, he was opposed to Obamacare because it would have increased the cost of one pizza by 10 cents. And at the time I said, and I still believe, if Papa John Schnatter said, we are going to increase the cost of our pizzas by 10 cents to cover the cost of giving everybody health insurance as dictated by the Affordable Care Act, I would have been more likely to go and buy his pizza. I still wouldn't have done it because the pizza's terrible, but I would have been slightly more likely. Or I guess what I mean is I would have actually seen that as a reason to support a business.
It would have been it would have been a good thing. Marketing decision.
No question. Marketing decision. And I think it would have been the right thing to do also for his employees. Then it continued when the national anthem protests got going last year. You'll remember NFL players were peacefully protesting either by kneeling or locking arms or being off the field during the national anthem before NFL football games. And Papa John Schnatter said that what the NFL should have done is, quote, nipped the protests in the bud, meaning the NFL should have exercised pressure on the speech of its employees. Not exactly a free market principle, right? And Schnatter ended up apologizing and sort of walking back the comments because of the PR damage that it did, but the damage was totally done at that point. It was total pandering. He tried to apologize by saying Papa John supports the rights of Americans to protest, but believes the anthem should be honored, clearly in a particular way. That's sort of trying to have it both ways. So it was a totally transparent attempt to pander. And now we've learned that Papa John's and the NFL are going their separate ways. Papa John's is saying we're just getting less out of this because NFL ratings are down. Fewer people are seeing the Papa John's ads, meaning fewer people are going and buying Papa John's pizza. That could be partially true, but this is a relationship that went sour, right? Both parties agreed to end what was an agreement that still had 3 years left. And now Pizza Hut is going to be the official pizza sponsor. Now, Pizza Hut is no beauty, as our president would say. The pizza itself, the last time I tried it 15 years ago, was absolutely horrifying. But the bigger picture is that Pizza Hut is owned by Yum Brands, and Yum Brands is a company that donates overwhelmingly to Republicans. About 80% of their donations last election cycle went to Republicans. They also own Trump's favorite, KFC, as well as the disturbing Taco Bell and some other lesser-known restaurants. So I'm not going to be supporting Yum Brands and Pizza Hut simply because they replaced Papa John's, but it's nice that this at least has not all worked out for Papa John, because truly the guy is vile.
You know, as a former Domino's customer service representative and pizza artist, I'm offended. I think that the NFL made the wrong decision here. They had a chance to choose Domino's and they went with Pizza Hut.
Yeah, but at this, you've come clean that Domino's pizza is terrible now, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say that because of the non-disclosure agreement I have.
Do you really have one?
Oh, sure, yeah. I'm still getting a pension from them.
That can't possibly be true. Big picture, don't go to commercial pizza places. Visit your local pizza shop. The pizza's better. More of the money is staying local. And I know people always say, David, you know, when you go to a chain restaurant or a big box store, the employees are still local and they are earning wages. Yeah, that's true. But why not apply the same logic to a local business where almost all the money stays local as opposed to just the employee wage component and some taxes, right? Go local. I exclusively now go to local pizza places. The last time I went to Domino's, no offense, Pat, was, I remember the date, December 30th of 1999. And the reason I remember the date is because I became violently ill after eating at Domino's. And at that point, I swore it off. I was only 15 years old at the time, and I've not been back since.
Were you healthy for the millennium? That was a big new year.
I think I was feeling better by then. Yeah, I believe so. I believe it was sort of a passing instance of distress.
So Domino's isn't all that bad. It's okay.
Listen, I'm sure that many people go to Domino's regularly and don't experience what I experienced that day. Congratulations to them. We've got a voicemail number. It's 219-2-DAVID-P. Here is a voicemail about my pronunciation. Let's take a listen.
David, I'm a linguist, and I like your show, but I've noticed you use a liquid U every time you say the word new. You say new. You say, we have a new thing to share with you. You put a liquid U in your pronunciation, and I just find it a little annoying as a linguist, because I don't think you need to use that liquid U.
Yeah. So part of my confusion here is at the beginning of the voicemail, the guy didn't have a British accent, but by the end of the voicemail, he did. So I don't know if me saying new rather than new sounds weird to him, but I've looked it up in the dictionary. Both new and new are accepted pronunciations in American English of the word spelled N-E-W. And I listen, in the end, English is my second language, and I can't really, I'm sort of, you can't criticize anything I say, because after all, I grew up speaking Spanish until I was 5, and then learned English. So,
I think you speak English pretty well.
Thank you.
Do you think this guy's trolling, though? Or is he a cunning linguist?
Yeah. Very, very. How long have you been waiting for that one?
The whole show.
Yeah, Pat has had that one. Did you really plan that earlier today?
Yeah.
Wow.
I wrote it down in my notes.
We've got to end the show on that note. Very, very clever, and you could tell Pat's eyes lit up because he had that one written down. Man, that was. Sometimes I plan them a couple days ahead of time, but then I cancel it because I know it's going to be so obvious that it was staged. But you actually did pretty well with that one.
It's all about timing. Delivery is important.
The guy is certainly cunning. All right, we'll talk to you on the bonus.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.